You betrayed our family. I will come back, and you'll pray it was only a nightmare.
From a young age, Cindy had an adventurous spirit that was often at odds with her need for structure. She was raised in a suburban neighborhood where weekend block parties and summer barbecues brought families together. Her father, an architect, would often take her to visit unfinished projects, teaching her the importance of planning, precision, and creativity. Her mother, a literature professor, instilled in her a love for storytelling, making Cindy an avid reader and a dreamer. These influences shaped her in unexpected ways. She was both pragmatic and imaginative, someone who found comfort in organization but also longed for moments of spontaneity. Despite her methodical nature, Cindy was known for embracing new challenges. In high school, she led the debate team, organized charity events, and even spent a summer volunteering abroad in Italy, where she fell in love with the art of hospitality. It was there, amidst the winding streets of Florence and the warmth of candle-lit cafes, that she first envisioned herself in a role where she could blend structure with creativity. But at that time, she never imagined that her path would one day lead to the intricate world of event planning. Cindy met Rick Thomas during her freshman year of college and was instantly drawn to his humor and energy. He always knew how to make her laugh and showed his affection in thoughtful, unexpected ways. Their relationship flourished through simple moments, long Sunday walks and quiet conversations in empty campus buildings. Handsome and kind, Rick won over both Cindy's parents and his own family, who adored her just as much. By his final semester, Rick secured a job at an investment firm on the West Coast, while Cindy, with a degree in education, accepted a teaching position in Orange County, near Rick's workplace in Anaheim. To celebrate their new beginnings, Rick took Cindy to a restaurant overlooking the Pacific, where he proposed with a family heirloom ring. Overwhelmed with joy, she accepted, and the surrounding diners applauded. 9 years later, Cindy was a mother to 6-year-old twins, Michael and Sarah, and still teaching. However, the demanding hours and low pay left her exhausted. Despite her love for teaching, the stress of dealing with difficult parents and time away from family pushed her to reconsider her career. Fortunately, both she and Rick were financially savvy, allowing her to step away from teaching, though it took time to find her next path. That change came unexpectedly. Cindy had remained close with her college best friend, Kelly, whose impulsive nature often led to spontaneous adventures. Unlike Cindy, who thrived on organization and careful planning, Kelly embraced life without hesitation. Their friendship balanced these differences, with Cindy often keeping Kelly out of trouble. One winter, Kelly invited Cindy to a wedding in Napa, needing a +1 for the event. Cindy hesitated, but eventually agreed, with Rick encouraging her to take the trip while he spent time with their children and his parents. At the wedding, as Cindy observed the chaotic and unorganized event, a conversation sparked an idea. There was a real demand for skilled event coordinators. 6 months of preparation later, Cindy launched her event planning business, We Plan, You Celebrate. Her natural organizational skills, honed through years of lesson planning and classroom management, made the transition seamless. Weddings, corporate events, and celebrations became her new passion, and she pursued her business with determination, carving out a successful new career. 2 years into her event planning career, Cindy had built a strong reputation, especially for organizing intimate coastal weddings in California. It was during this time that she crossed paths with Bennett Davis, a successful hotelier who owned 3 upscale boutique hotels, one in San Diego, another in Santa Barbara, and a third on the Monterey Peninsula. Each of his properties thrived thanks to his relentless work ethic and high standards for his well-compensated staff. Bennett's journey in the hospitality industry began at 26 when he took a bold risk, purchasing and restoring a deteriorating 90-year-old mansion in Santa Barbara. With limited funds but unwavering determination, he launched the hotel on a tight budget. The first 2 years were grueling, requiring 100-hour work weeks and relentless effort, yet progress was slow. By the 3rd year, he broke even, and by the 4th, the hotel turned a profit. Over the next 5 years, he expanded, adding properties in San Diego and Monterey. 14 years in, his commitment remained unchanged. He worked hard, but also enjoyed life, especially fine wine, dancing, and good company. Known as a devoted bachelor, he was upfront about his lack of interest in long-term relationships, though he treated people with fairness and respect. 16 months before Cindy's professional breakthrough, Bennett and his human resources director, Lori Templeton, attended a hospitality industry expo in Los Angeles. As they browsed the booths, they came across We Plan, You Celebrate. Bennett was drawn to Cindy's professionalism, but it was her bright blue eyes, hinting at a playful nature, that caught his attention. Their conversation, though centered on business, carried an undeniable spark. Bennett questioned her thoroughly. Her success rate, her team, her relationships with venue staff, and her best and worst events. He also slipped in casual inquiries about her personal interests, subtly taking note of her wedding ring. Cindy responded with enthusiasm, appreciating his industry knowledge and easygoing demeanor. Laurie, observing the exchange, recognized Bennett's particular interest. When the discussion wrapped up, he invited Cindy to dinner with him and Laurie. Cindy politely declined, eager to return home to Rick and the twins, but expressed interest in visiting his Santa Barbara property. They arranged a tour for the following week. The visit exceeded expectations. Cindy arrived early, taking time to explore the historic mission nearby before heading to the Winfield Scott Hotel. Greeted warmly by staff, she immediately sensed the hotel's welcoming atmosphere. As she stepped into the lobby, she found Bennett waiting, polished in crisp navy and tailored khakis, exuding confidence. For the first time, she acknowledged how striking he was, though it didn't shake her deep devotion to Rick. With Laurie absent, Bennett personally welcomed Cindy, eager to discuss a potential collaboration. Their shared ambition and drive made the partnership an obvious choice. Though they hadn't fully realized it yet, their connection, rooted in mutual respect and a passion for excellence, was undeniable. Cindy chose a refined yet effortless look, a black sleeveless sundress paired with a pastel linen scarf that accentuated her striking blue eyes. Her elegant Stuart Weitzman sandals added just enough height, enhancing her already statuesque frame. Practical and self-assured, Cindy understood that appearances mattered in business, especially with someone like Bennett. But she had always balanced charm with sharp instincts. As they entered the hotel lobby, it was clear Bennett had prepared meticulously. Every staff member seemed to know Cindy's name, and at their patio table, a small vase of California wildflowers added a thoughtful touch. A bottle of Pinot Noir, the exact one she had mentioned in passing, waited on the table. Bennett's attention to detail was impressive, and Cindy reminded herself to stay sharp in negotiations. Over lunch, they chatted about travel, the recent forest fires, and the ocean's mesmerizing view before shifting to business. Cindy kept her wine intake minimal, ensuring she remained focused. Once the meal wrapped up, Laurie excused herself, and Bennett led Cindy on a personal tour of the Winfield Scott Hotel. Cindy, always prepared, noted the historical significance of the hotel's name, referencing the legendary 1853 shipwreck. Bennett, amused by her knowledge, quipped about treasure, and their easy laughter underscored a growing rapport. Back in Bennett's office, discussions became more strategic. They finalized an agreement. Cindy would coordinate weddings and special events at his venues. By the time the deal was set, it was well into the evening. Bennett escorted Cindy to her car, shaking her hand with a firm yet lingering grip before leaning in to brush a light kiss on her cheek. She thanked him, promising to follow up with Laurie about upcoming weddings. As she drove away, an unexpected wave of attraction unsettled her. She had never allowed herself to consider another man in that way. Her life with Rick and the twins was full, happy, and deeply rooted in love. Shaking off the thoughts, she glanced in the rearview mirror, spotting one of Sarah's favorite books lying on the back seat. The sight jolted her back to reality. Enough, she told herself. You're a married woman. Get it together. Frustrated with herself, she turned on a business podcast, hoping to drown out lingering distractions. Yet, deep down, she couldn't deny how close she had come to crossing an invisible line. Back at the hotel, Bennett retreated to his room, reflecting on the day. Cindy was unlike anyone he had met, intelligent, poised, and undeniably beautiful. He had dated stunning women before, but none had captivated him quite like her. The way she carried herself, the effortless confidence in her presence, even the way she looked back at him before leaving, it all lingered in his mind. She was married, yet something about her felt unfinished, like a story waiting to be written. Meanwhile, at home, Rick prepared dinner with Michael and Sarah, their laughter filling the kitchen. He thought about Cindy, grateful for the life they had built together. As the family sat down to eat, Sarah animatedly recounted her adventures with the neighbor's cat Ralph, and Cindy briefly considered adopting a pet. But as months passed and Cindy's work at Winfield Scott increased, the boundaries between professionalism and something more began to blur. A lingering touch on the arm, a guiding hand on the small of her back, casual yet unmistakable flirtation. It all became part of an unspoken exchange. She never pulled away. Rick had only visited the venue once early on, and Bennett had conveniently been away. Looking back, Cindy wondered if that had been intentional. By the time the last guests had left and the cleanup crew finished their work, it was nearly 1 a.m. Cindy and Lori sat on the patio, unwinding with a glass of Dom Perignon they had conveniently rescued from the bar. Exhausted but satisfied with another successful event, they took a moment to relax. Lori, kicking off her painful heels, hesitated before bringing up something weighing on her mind. She had seen the undeniable tension between Cindy and Bennett from the beginning. Cindy was exactly his type, intelligent, confident, and effortlessly beautiful. While Bennett respected her marriage, Lori knew that if Cindy ever gave him the slightest opening, he wouldn't hesitate. Cindy listened, conflicted. She loved Rick, his unwavering support, their deep conversations, their laughter, their life together. Yet Bennett stirred something different in her, something thrilling and dangerous. She knew the attraction wasn't just in her head. His subtle touches, lingering looks, and effortless charm had chipped away at her usual self-control. She never imagined herself in this position. Just months ago, the thought of infidelity would have been unthinkable. She believed in commitment, in the sanctity of marriage. Yet here she was, battling emotions she didn't want to acknowledge. She could see the risk, the near certainty that crossing that line would destroy everything she had built with Rick. And still, a part of her wasn't entirely sure she could resist. The weight of it all became too much. Overwhelmed, she broke down, silently grappling with the war inside her. Lori, sensing the turmoil, simply stayed by her side, knowing the decision wasn't hers to make, but hoping Cindy would choose wisely. The next morning, Lori confronted Bennett. She had worked alongside him for years and knew him too well to ignore what was unfolding. If he crossed that line, she was done. And there was no point trying to hide it. She would find out. Leaving him with that warning, she walked out without another word, slamming the door just enough to make her point. 3 weeks after Lori's warning, circumstances aligned in the most unexpected way. A sudden thunderstorm nearly derailed an outdoor wedding, forcing a frantic relocation indoors. Cindy and Lori led the effort, directing staff while ensuring the bride and groom made it safely inside. By the time the last guest retired for the night, it was past midnight, and exhaustion settled over the venue. Cindy and Bennett found themselves alone on the patio, watching the ocean. Despite the success of the event, she was frustrated, her pursuit of perfection clashing with the uncontrollable forces of nature. Sensing her disappointment, Bennett placed an arm around her shoulders, offering reassurance. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself lean into him, comforted by his presence. The tension that had simmered between them for months finally reached its breaking point. Cindy hesitated only for a moment before giving in, closing the space between them. When Bennett made it clear there was no pressure, that she had to want this as much as he did, her internal battle crumbled. A line was crossed, and what had once been temptation became action. For the next 2 hours, they discussed how to keep their affair hidden. Cindy assured him she could manage her emotions, compartmentalize, and continue her life without suspicion. Before leaving, she planned to sleep for a few hours before heading home, ensuring everything appeared normal. Meanwhile, Bennett meticulously erased any evidence of their time together. By Sunday afternoon, Cindy returned home to the excited voices of her children. Michael and Sarah ran to her, eager to share their weekend adventures. Their innocence, their joy, should have grounded her. But as she stepped inside and saw Rick, casual, smiling, utterly devoted, guilt crept in. His effortless kindness, the way he had planned a weekend full of fun for the kids while she had been away, made the weight of her actions even heavier. That night, she and Rick sat in the hot tub, sharing wine and conversation. He was exhausted from the weekend, and Cindy feigned the same, grateful he expected nothing but honesty from her. He had no reason to doubt her. By Monday, Rick had planned a surprise. He left a note before heading to work, instructing her to be ready by 4 p.m., dressed in a blue sundress. He had arranged everything: the kids, an overnight stay, even enlisting Kelly's help to pack a bag. When Cindy realized he had planned a romantic getaway at the Ritz-Carlton, she was stunned. As they walked along the beach and later sat down for dinner, she tried to focus on the man who had always been her home. But beneath the surface, the consequences of her choices lingered, waiting to catch up with her. Late at night, Cindy and Rick sat on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out over the calm Pacific. Their conversation drifted between dreams, the future, and Rick's big news. He had been promoted to partner, more money, less travel. He even suggested joining her for some weddings on the weekends. She smiled, proud of him, but beneath the surface, unease stirred. If he had seen her face in that moment, he might have realized something was wrong. Pushing aside her thoughts, she moved to his lap, embracing him, telling herself that she could still hold on to the life they had built. The next morning, over breakfast in bed, Rick reassured her he supported her business, wanted her to pursue it as far as she wished. He had never asked her to slow down or step back, no matter how successful he became. Cindy knew how lucky she was, but instead of feeling grateful, she found herself mentally reviewing her arrangement with Bennett, ensuring their secret remained airtight. She convinced herself she could have it all: her husband, her family, her business, and the thrill of Bennett. In her mind, she and Bennett would eventually part ways. He would move on, she would stay with Rick, and life would continue without consequences. She never once considered the damage that was already in motion. A month later, Rick's promotion became official, and Cindy had another wedding in San Diego. During a meeting with Bennett, they refined their business deal, with him offering additional incentives based on the clients she brought in. They discussed numbers as though their affair was just another business arrangement. Then Lori walked in. Without hesitation, she confronted them both, making it clear she had seen what happened the night of the storm. She had warned Bennett months ago that if he crossed the line with Cindy, she would leave. Now, she was following through. She wasn't just disappointed, she was disgusted. Cindy and Bennett, both intelligent and successful, were behaving like reckless teenagers, blind to the inevitable fallout. Lori had already secured a new job in Austin and would be gone by August. She had no interest in exposing them, but she refused to be part of the deception. Turning to Cindy, she didn't hold back. Rick didn't deserve this betrayal. The vows Cindy had made to her husband, her family, and even herself had been discarded. Lori wouldn't even mention the twins, because the thought of what this would do to them was too painful. She ended by assuring them she would remain professional until her departure, but any personal connection was over. With that, she walked out. Left in silence, Cindy felt the weight of everything collapse on her. Tears streamed down her face. Bennett sat quietly, his usual confidence gone. The night they had planned together was no longer an option. Cindy stood abruptly. There was nothing left to say. She told Bennett she regretted everything, then left without another word. Instead of going home, she checked into a Courtyard Marriott in Orange County, using a credit card Rick never monitored. On the way, she bought a bottle of whiskey. Alone in a hotel room, she drank until she couldn't think anymore. Then she passed out, trying to escape the reality of what she had done. Lori followed through on her promise, resigning and leaving for Austin within 2 weeks. Bennett made no attempt to stop her, knowing it would be pointless. Cindy, burdened by guilt but unwilling to let go of her affair, sent a brief apology via text. Lori never responded. By early fall, tension lingered between Cindy and Bennett, but it did nothing to dull their passion. Within weeks, they resumed their secret meetings, indulging in weekend getaways under the pretense of work. One October evening, after a wedding in Washington, they took a coastal drive to a secluded chalet, spending the weekend in each other's arms. Cindy convinced herself she had mastered the balance. Her business thrived, her children were happy, and she had both the security of a devoted husband and the thrill of a passionate affair. She dismissed Lori's warnings, believing she could sustain this double life indefinitely. That illusion shattered in December. During a wedding at Spanish Moss, one of Bennett's smaller hotels, Cindy remained unaware that Rick had booked a suite for the weekend. Believing she had been distant due to work, he planned a surprise visit, arranging every detail: a romantic setting, fresh flowers, her favorite wine. He assumed the strain between them was temporary, something a weekend away could fix. Rick arrived quietly, waiting for Cindy to finish her event. Spotting Bennett earlier, he considered sharing his surprise, but ultimately decided against it. When she didn't appear after the rehearsal dinner, he searched the hotel, expecting to find her caught up in last-minute wedding preparations. Instead, he overheard a conversation that stopped him cold. Cindy's voice, warm and teasing, hinted at something unmistakable. Moments later, turning a corner, he saw the truth for himself. His wife stood in another man's embrace. Shock paralyzed him. Cindy's expression turned to horror as she realized he was there. Bennett stepped back, speechless. The weight of betrayal crushed Rick in an instant, grief and disbelief overwhelming him. He sank to the floor, his world collapsing around him. Cindy rushed to him, but no words could undo what had just happened. Pain quickly turned to fury. Rick pulled away, his devastation shifting into something colder. He refused to let her speak, refused to hear any justifications. With a final look of contempt, he walked away, leaving Cindy frozen in place. For the first time, she didn't try to rationalize her actions. She knew there was nothing she could say. Without a word to Bennett, she returned to her room. Inside, everything was perfect. Neatly arranged pillows, a warm bed, and the silence of a life she had just destroyed. She collapsed onto it, her body shaking. The reality of what she had done finally set in. There was no way to undo this. No way out. Rick sat frozen at his desk for an hour before finally pulling himself together. He knew he couldn't stay any longer, but he had nowhere else to go except home. By the time he arrived, it would be morning. He decided to clean up at the office, send a quick message to Mrs. Bowling about his early return, and pretend, for the sake of his children, that nothing had changed, at least for now. Before leaving, he wrote Cindy a note, sealed it in an envelope, and left it on the table. His words were raw, filled with devastation and anger. He told her he was going home to the kids, but needed time to think. He wouldn't speak to her, wouldn't even look at her until he could process what had happened. She was to text before returning so he could leave before she arrived. His hatred for her in that moment was absolute, a stark contrast to the love he had once given so freely. By the time Bennett stepped out of his room an hour later, Rick was gone. He found the letter and, intending to deliver it directly, went to Cindy's room. But the sound of her sobs stopped him. He hesitated, realizing the weight of what he had done. Not just the affair, but the pain it had caused. Always cautious, always in control, he had let his guard down this time, and now Cindy was shattered. When her cries finally faded into exhausted sleep, he quietly entered, leaving the note on her bedside table. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he lingered at the door, watching over her as she slept. Cindy woke at dawn, her body drained from a night of restless tossing. As soon as she stepped out of the bathroom, another wave of grief hit her. Then, she saw the envelope. She had always been strong, unafraid to face consequences, but as she stared at Rick's name on the front, she froze. She knew this would be brutal. She deserved every word. With trembling hands, she sat on the bed, opened the envelope, and read. By the time she reached the last line, she had collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Bennett found her like that, kneeling beside her, holding her as she broke down. A part of her wanted to blame him, to accuse him of tempting her, pulling her into this disaster. But she knew better. This had been a choice. Lori had warned her. She had ignored every sign. She wasn't a victim. She had done this to herself. After a long silence, Cindy whispered that she would go home once she pulled herself together. She didn't know what would happen, but she had to face it. Bennett reassured her, telling her he would always be there, though they both understood that this might be their final conversation. As he left, he quietly instructed the staff to bring her car to the front, but to leave her alone. The newer employees followed orders without question. The seasoned staff, however, weren't naive. They knew who Mr. Rick was, and they knew exactly what had happened. By mid-morning, the entire hotel was buzzing. 15 minutes from home, Cindy sent a message to Rick asking if they could talk after the kids were asleep. His response was immediate. He was already gone. The children had been fed, and this would be their last contact until he decided otherwise. He asked her to respect his request, though he doubted she would. Tears blurred her vision as she read his words. The name Cinderella, once spoken with love, now carried nothing but finality. She was no longer his wife, no longer his best friend. She was simply the woman who had betrayed him in the worst way possible. The weight of what she had done settled deeper. What would happen to their family now? By the end of the longest week of her life, Rick finally called. His voice was cold, controlled. He informed her he would return home that evening, determined to act normal in front of the kids. He would sleep in the guest room, wake up early to maintain the illusion, and wouldn't speak to her until Sunday when they could talk privately. His words cut deep. He wasn't sure how many more family weekends they had left. Cindy barely held herself together, but when she responded with a soft, hopeful tone, his anger snapped through the line. He ordered her to stop speaking to him as if they were still a couple. There was no love left between them. Whatever they once had was gone. Then, without another word, he hung up. Somehow, they made it through the weekend. Pizza and a movie on Friday, a beach day on Saturday. Both pretending for the sake of the children. Michael and Sarah, sensing something off, clung to them more than usual. When Michael pulled them into a family hug, Cindy caught a glimpse of Rick's empty expression. Even as he played the role of a devoted father, there was nothing left behind his eyes. On Sunday afternoon, Rick insisted the kids stay with Mrs. Bowling while he and Cindy went out. At the park, they walked in silence until they found a quiet bench. He sat facing the crowd, as he always did, scanning the surroundings, preparing for something unseen. Without emotion, he asked her to speak first, explaining that if he started, he might not be able to stop himself. She hesitated, but knew this was her burden to bear. She forced herself to begin, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She admitted everything. The affair had lasted nearly 8 months. She had never been drawn to another man before Bennett, never strayed, never sought anything outside their marriage. But she hadn't resisted his attention either. The attraction had been undeniable, and she had made a choice. No one had pressured her. No one had manipulated her. Bennett had even given her the chance to walk away before it started. But she hadn't. She had walked forward, fully aware of what she was doing. She wasn't a victim. The full weight of responsibility rested on her shoulders. Cindy struggled to find the words, knowing nothing she said could undo the damage. She wanted to tell Rick she loved him, that it had meant nothing, that she desperately hoped they could repair what was broken. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. For months, she had hidden a part of herself from him, deceiving not just Rick, but also herself. When she was with him, a small part of her had still been with Bennett. If that hadn't been the case, she would have never crossed the line. She had convinced herself that their life together would go on as if nothing had changed, that Rick would remain blissfully unaware, they would raise their children, and they would grow old together. But self-deception is always the first step before betraying someone else. She had betrayed everything that had once mattered most to her. She had never thought about the long-term consequences, never considered what would happen if she got caught. Now, looking at the devastation on Rick's face, she realized there was no possible outcome where things would be okay. Even if their marriage survived, it would never be the same. Finally, she admitted the worst of it. She wasn't even sorry for getting caught. She was destroyed by the pain she had inflicted on the one person who had loved her unconditionally. She had always believed herself to be a good person, but now she saw her own selfishness for what it was, and she had to live with it. Rick sat in silence, his head hanging low, his body rigid with the weight of everything crashing down on him. His emotions, once full of love and joy, had been replaced with grief, loss, and humiliation. He wanted to yell, to unleash his anger, but he felt nothing but exhaustion. He had never known a pain like this before. After a long stretch of silence, he finally spoke, his voice quiet, but unwavering. He admitted he didn't know if this was the last conversation they would ever have as husband and wife. He was still trying to process it all. What he did know was that he appreciated her honesty, at least what he assumed was honesty. But he would never truly know for sure. Hearing that hurt more than Cindy had expected. His words were true, and yet the realization that he would never fully believe her again crushed her. She buried her face in her hands, unable to meet his eyes. Rick continued, his tone growing colder as he laid out the facts. For 8 months, she had lied to him. She had shared her body, her time, her thoughts with another man while he had trusted her without question. He had loved her completely, had never doubted her loyalty, and now he knew that trust had been a mistake. He told her with finality that Cinderella was dead. There was no Prince Charming to save her, and there never would be. Cindy's breathing hitched. Hearing him say it out loud made the finality of their marriage feel real for the first time. Rick admitted that for the first time in his life, he felt hopeless. It was a foreign and unbearable feeling. He wasn't going to file for divorce immediately, not because he wanted to save their marriage, but because he refused to put their children through that pain. He had once heard a psychologist say that children cope better with loss than they do with the rejection of divorce. He had always believed that, but never imagined it would apply to him. Yet, the alternative, pretending for years until the twins were grown, was equally unthinkable. He couldn't look at Cindy without feeling sick. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew he couldn't continue like this. Cindy, desperate for clarity, asked if she should move out. Rick refused, saying they needed to maintain stability for the children. He suggested that if he took business trips occasionally and she continued working her usual wedding weekends, they could find enough space to manage. But beyond that, where she went and who she saw was no longer his concern. His love for her had been erased, just as hers had been cast aside during those 8 months. He wouldn't waste energy caring anymore. She tried to protest, insisting she wouldn't be with Bennett, but Rick cut her off. He no longer cared about her choices. The only way he could survive was by detaching completely, treating her the way she had treated him. Maybe therapy would help him find a healthier way to cope. But for now, she was on her own. They sat in silence for a long time, both crying. There were no reassurances, no promises to work through it. They knew there was nothing left to salvage. As Cindy sat across from him, she thought back to Laurie's warnings. The price of her choices had finally come due, and it was heavier than she had ever imagined. What she didn't realize yet was that the worst was still to come. For the next month, Cindy and Rick maintained the illusion of normalcy for their children. They attended Sarah's soccer games, Michael's karate lessons, and school meetings without raising suspicion. Even their close friends and teachers remained unaware of the turmoil hidden behind closed doors. But once the children were asleep, the reality was starkly different. Cindy longed for conversations that never came, hoping Rick would be ready to talk. But Rick, drowning in betrayal and humiliation, focused on survival. He spent his nights planning his next steps, taking overnight trips under the guise of work, using the time to walk, think, and reassess his life. Therapy was necessary, he knew that much. But beyond that, he had no answers. A strategist by nature, Rick applied the same analytical skills that had made him successful in his career to his personal life. He broke down his situation into risks and outcomes, examining every possibility. Could they continue living together in pretense for the sake of their children? Would divorce be a better alternative? How would the firm react if this scandal surfaced? What financial implications would a separation bring? More importantly, what did Cindy really want? Did she regret getting caught, or did she regret her actions? One question stood out. Was there an option beyond divorce or forced coexistence? It was this final thought that led him toward a radical alternative. It would be difficult, almost impossible, but if executed correctly, it might be the best option for everyone involved. Sitting on the patio of a Courtyard Marriott late one night, Rick examined his idea from every angle. It required careful planning, precise execution, and full commitment. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had control over something. 2 weeks later, his plan was still forming, but he was confident enough to talk to Cindy. He arranged for Mrs. Bowling to watch the kids, and deliberately took Cindy back to the same park where they'd had their first painful conversation about her betrayal. Returning to that place, he felt, was necessary. At the same weathered picnic table, where their marriage had begun to unravel, Rick spoke first. He acknowledged how difficult the past weeks had been and thanked Cindy for respecting his need for space. He promised honesty, but warned that she might not like what she heard. Cindy listened intently, nodding, her face a mixture of hope and fear. Rick stated plainly that he had no intention of revisiting the details of her affair. He had already made his peace with the fact that his trust had been shattered. He had always believed in their love, in their commitment. He had never strayed, never even entertained the thought of replacing her in his heart. He had assumed they would grow old together, but he had been wrong. Cindy, desperate for any chance at reconciliation, pleaded for them to fight for their marriage. She admitted she didn't deserve forgiveness, but was willing to do whatever it took to repair the damage. Rick's expression remained unreadable as he responded. He had given deep thought to the possibility of rebuilding their relationship. He believed forgiveness was possible, but forgiveness, he explained, was not the same as trust. Trust for him was gone forever. Even in the most basic conversations, he knew he would always doubt her words. He would never again believe she was simply going to work or traveling for business without wondering if she was meeting someone else. The paranoia alone would poison whatever remained of their marriage. And then, there was something even more painful: intimacy. He admitted that no matter how much time passed, he would never be able to touch her without picturing Bennett. The betrayal was more than emotional. It was physical. Every kiss, every touch, every embrace, he would see another man in her place. She had given herself willingly, without hesitation, choosing someone else over him again and again. That image would never leave him. Cindy felt herself breaking all over again. She had been ready to fight for them, to promise that she would remain faithful for the rest of their lives. But she also knew she had no right to demand his trust. For the first time, Cindy saw a level of fury in Rick's eyes that made her recoil. His voice remained controlled, but the sharpness of his words cut deep. She had asked if they could fight for their marriage, but Rick refused to accept the idea that she had ever fought for them. Every day, he had worked to build their life, to provide for her, to be present for their children, to ensure she had everything she loved. That was fighting for their family. Meanwhile, she had been in another man's bed. Tears streamed down both their faces as Rick continued, his voice laced with pain. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, but what was the point? How could he ever believe anything she said? She had lied for months. Why would now be any different? She might claim remorse, but what if she was only saying the right words to avoid consequences? He feared that the only real lesson she had learned was how to hide it better next time. Their marriage had been built on trust and love, but those were dead now. There was no going back, only forward, toward whatever came next. Then it hit him, the night at the Ritz. He realized, with sickening clarity, that she had been with Bennett just before that trip. She had slept with another man and then come home to him, letting him plan a romantic evening, pretending she was his faithful wife. He had looked at her with admiration, pride, and love, completely oblivious to the truth. How foolish he had been. Cindy had no argument to offer, only overwhelming regret. Rick had fought for them every day of their marriage, and she had thrown it away for fleeting passion. She had adored him once, so deeply. But somewhere along the way, she had let selfishness, temptation, and lust destroy everything they had built. When she finally found her voice, she asked the question that had been looming between them. Was he going to divorce her? Rick's response was unexpected. No, he wasn't divorcing her. But he wasn't staying married to her either. He had been working on a solution that he believed would be best for everyone, though it wouldn't come without pain. He refused to let her opinion influence his choices because he no longer trusted her to have his or their children's best interests at heart. Once he had finalized his plan, she would know. Until then, she would have to wait. Cindy, confused and desperate, pressed for answers. But Rick's expression remained unreadable, calm, resigned. He simply told her that she would find out in time. They spoke for a few more minutes, but Rick gave nothing away. He was certain she would understand when the moment arrived. Cindy then admitted something she had never shared before. Lori had warned her months ago that playing with fire would lead to consequences. She had ignored it. She hadn't stopped. She hadn't come to Rick to confess or seek help. She had made her choice and continued forward without hesitation. Rick flinched, realizing that Cindy had known the risks and had still betrayed him. She hadn't been caught in a moment of weakness. She had made a deliberate, repeated choice. Tears streamed down his face. Cindy sobbed, burying her head in her hands. For a moment, she thought he might comfort her. She prayed he would. Instead, he stood before her, arms crossed. His voice was quiet but final. The bagpiper will come soon, and when he does, at least part of the debt will have to be paid. Maybe one day, the full price will be due. 2 weeks later, Rick left for his usual overnight trip, hugging the children goodbye with a sadness that Cindy noticed but didn't fully understand. She assumed it was the weight of everything, the pain of pretending for their sake. To help with her insomnia, she had started taking melatonin. That night, at Rick's suggestion, she let the kids stay with Mrs. Bowling, who was always happy to watch them. A couple of glasses of wine and an early night, Rick had told her, might give her the first real sleep she had gotten in weeks. Cindy agreed. She had no idea that when she woke up, her entire world would be shattered. At 5:30 a.m., Cindy's phone vibrated endlessly on the nightstand before she finally stirred, groggy and disoriented. The screen flashed one word: emergency. The moment she answered, a firm but controlled voice asked if she was Cindy Thomas, wife of Richard Thomas. No one ever called him Richard. A cold wave of panic gripped her. Sitting upright, she confirmed her identity, her voice shaky. The dispatcher methodically verified her address, then asked what car Rick drove, a gray Lexus. The dread in her chest tightened, suffocating her. Then came the words that shattered everything. Rick had been in an accident on Highway 79 near Warner Springs. It was fatal. His body was being transported to UC San Diego Medical Center. Her mind refused to process it. The words felt unreal, distant, like a scene from someone else's nightmare. And then, all at once, the weight of reality crashed down. A scream tore through her throat, raw, guttural, endless. She crumpled onto the bed, sobbing into the sheets, the sound of her own agony filling the silent house. For nearly an hour, she wept until there was nothing left, until exhaustion dulled the edges of her grief. Somewhere in the haze, she forced herself to think. The children, they didn't know. How would she tell them? When? She needed to call her mother, Rick's parents, but the thought of speaking the words out loud, of making this real, paralyzed her. She needed to go to the morgue to see him, but her body felt frozen. Kelly was in Europe. She had no one to lean on. Still trembling, she splashed cold water on her face, dressed hastily, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and moved toward the door just as the doorbell rang. Brad Stanton stood on the porch, his face drawn, his eyes heavy with grief. Their family lawyer and one of Rick's closest friends, he had seen the news and come immediately. Without a word, Cindy collapsed into his arms, shaking uncontrollably. Moments later, Mrs. Bowling rushed across the lawn, still in her robe, her expression filled with worry. She didn't need to ask. Brad's face told her everything. Without hesitation, she pulled Cindy into her embrace, whispering words of comfort. Cindy finally found enough strength to insist she had to see Rick. Brad agreed to drive. Mrs. Bowling promised to take care of the children, to keep their morning as normal as possible, to take them to school before they learned the truth. They didn't need to know, not yet. As they drove toward the hospital, Cindy's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, colleagues, people who had already heard. She forced herself to call her mother, who immediately booked the first available flight. Then, with shaking hands, she dialed Connor and Lily Thomas, Rick's parents. Telling them was worse than hearing the news herself. Their cries echoed through the phone, devastation consuming them. They too would fly in, determined to be there when the children came home from school. Turning off her phone, Cindy stared blankly at the horizon. The morning sun rose over the Pacific, beautiful and indifferent as her world collapsed around her. The next 5 days blurred into an unrelenting nightmare, she told the children. She watched their faces crumble, their innocence shatter. She arranged the funeral, met with the authorities, called insurance companies. There were 3 life insurance policies, all requiring endless paperwork. She canceled events, postponed weddings. Every moment felt surreal, a suffocating fog of logistics and grief. Questions surfaced, whispers turning into murmurs. Why had Rick been driving over an hour outside the city so early in the morning? The toxicology report revealed nothing. No alcohol, no pills, no impairments. His stomach contents showed he had eaten steak and salad the night before, but had only drunk water. He had been speeding, but why? No one had answers. Bennett picked up his phone countless times, typing out messages before erasing them. He knew Cindy was suffering more than anyone could imagine, and hearing from him would only make things worse. Lori learned of Rick's death in the middle of a client meeting. Her assistant saw the devastation on her face, but also something else. She didn't seem entirely surprised. She never attended the funeral. By Friday morning, the church overflowed with people whose lives Rick had touched. Friends, colleagues, and mentors shared stories of his loyalty, his generosity, his unwavering kindness. Cindy sat in silence, listening, absorbing each word like a dagger to her chest. She had known Rick was a good man, but only now did she realize how deeply he had impacted others. He wasn't just a devoted husband and father. He was the kind of friend people relied on, the kind of leader people admired. Every story, every memory, every tear shed in his honor crushed her under the weight of her own betrayal. She had thrown away something extraordinary. She had been blind to what she had, and as she sat in that church, drowning in guilt, she had no idea that the worst was still to come. Late Sunday evening, Brad Stanton arrived at Cindy's home, his face grim as he exchanged quiet words with her mother and in-laws. They quickly gathered the children and left without question. When Cindy descended the stairs, she found Brad sitting at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. Something about his presence unsettled her. He declined her offer of a drink and motioned for her to sit. He wasted no time. He explained that while he was her friend, today he was here as Rick's attorney, fulfilling a final obligation. Rick had left explicit instructions, and Brad was simply carrying them out. Cindy's breath caught in her throat. Rick was gone, yet he had left behind unfinished business. Brad reassured her that he had no prior knowledge of what had happened to Rick, as if anticipating her confusion. Rick had planned for this, not the accident itself, but for what would follow if something ever happened to him. Everything was handled legally, paid for in advance, and set in motion weeks before his death. He handed her a sealed letter, its edges crisp and deliberate, and told her he had no idea what was inside. He was only instructed to deliver it and leave. Cindy's hands trembled as she took it. She asked if there was anything else, any other instructions or explanations. Brad, looking uncomfortable, admitted there were more details, but Rick had strictly forbidden him from disclosing them. Everything would unfold in time. Without another word, he stood and walked out the door. Alone now, Cindy hesitated before breaking the seal. As she unfolded the pages, she braced herself for the reckoning she knew was coming. "Cindy, By now, you know that I'm gone and the funeral is over. The kids are with my parents or your mother, and you've been given time to process this alone. This is the third option, the one I never told you about. The best one I could find? I loved you once with everything I had, but you took that away. This is the best I can do now. 1. The accident. 2 weeks ago, I purchased 2 acres of land near Eagle's Nest by the lake. That's why I was on Highway 79. It was meant to be a surprise, a place for us to build a retreat, to create something for the kids. That's the official story, and you must stick to it. 2. The truth. The land purchase was a cover. If anyone suspects otherwise, the insurance companies won't pay a cent. I was there to check on the property, got up early to head home, and was in a hurry to make a 9:30 a.m. client meeting. That's why I was speeding. That's why I lost control. If anyone questions it, Brad will handle it, but only if you hold to this story. 3. Money. I changed my will weeks ago. 90% of my estate, roughly $3 million, will go into a trust for our children. They will have everything they need for college, graduate school, and beyond. At 30, they'll receive what's left, split equally. Brad will ensure the details are followed. You will receive 10%, $300,000. It's enough to get you through until you go back to work. It's more than I wanted to leave you, but I couldn't justify giving you nothing. You need to take care of the children while pretending to mourn me. That will be enough. 4. The children. I once told you that a psychologist said children cope better with loss than with the rejection of divorce. I researched it. It's true. That's why I couldn't leave them that way. One day they might learn the truth. Maybe they'll hate me for it. Maybe not, but at least for now, they will grieve without feeling abandoned. 5. Your future. I won't tell you what to do with your life. Maybe you'll go back to Bennett, or maybe there's already someone else. Whatever you do, at least think about the kids this time. They'll be out of the house in less than a decade. Perhaps you could keep your lovers at a distance until then. 6. A final request. Burn this letter when you're done, completely. If the insurance companies find it, our children's financial security will be destroyed. Read it again if you must. But if I ever meant anything to you, burn it. And don't worry. Maybe you'll hear from me again someday. Rick. Cindy's hands shook as she read, then reread the letter. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, her mind unable to keep up with the words before her. This wasn't just a farewell. This was Rick's final move. And for the first time, she understood. He had planned everything. 12 years had passed since Rick's death on Highway 79, though in reality, Cindy knew he had died the moment he saw her in another man's arms. Everything after that was just logistics. The how and when. She never remarried, never shared Rick's secret, and honored his final instructions without question. The $300,000 he left her sustained the family while she grieved, and over a year later, she returned to work. But weddings and family celebrations became unbearable, so she shifted to corporate event planning, where emotions weren't so deeply woven into her work. She built a successful career, but something within her remained broken. She dated occasionally, but no one ever measured up to Rick. Counselors helped her process the guilt, but one question lingered. If she ever remarried, would she betray that man too? Michael and Sarah, now 20, had grown into strong, driven young adults. Michael thrived on human connection, finding energy in social settings, and pursued a degree in hospitality and marketing at USC. Sarah, analytical like her father, found her passion in numbers and strategy, studying economics at Stanford. Their father's absence shaped them both, a wound that never fully healed. Cindy's past, however, remained buried, until the morning Brad Stanton arrived at her doorstep. She was reviewing a contract for an executive retreat when the doorbell rang. A steaming cup of black coffee sat beside her as she opened the door to find Brad standing there, his expression unreadable. "It's been a while," she greeted, smiling as she hugged him. He returned the gesture, but his posture was tense, formal. "Can we talk for a minute?" Sensing something serious, Cindy stepped aside, offering him coffee. He declined, saying he wouldn't be long. They sat at the kitchen table, and Brad wasted no time. Today would have been Rick's 45th birthday. Cindy stiffened. She had forgotten. April 7th. The realization hit her hard, and she made a mental note to call the kids. Brad continued, his tone measured but firm. "As you know, before Rick died, he changed his will and left instructions. As his lawyer, I followed them exactly, but as his friend, I knew something was wrong. He never told me what, and I didn't push too hard. Until today." Cindy frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Brad pulled a folded envelope from his pocket. At exactly 6 this morning, a courier knocked on my door. The package had no familiar sender, just a P.O. box in Austin, Texas. Inside was a letter from Rick, 12 single-spaced pages long. Attached was a handwritten note signed simply L. Lori. A chill ran down Cindy's spine. The weight of memories and buried pain resurfaced instantly. Brad exhaled slowly. The note was short. It just said, "Please read carefully and follow the instructions. L." Then I opened Rick's letter. The first line was classic Rick. "Hey buddy, get your A out of bed. I need you to help me finish some unfinished business." "Yeah, I know it's 6 a.m. I paid extra to make sure they delivered it exactly on time." Brad paused, letting his words sink in. Cindy could barely breathe. "I won't go into every detail, Cindy, but Rick told me everything, every last detail." His voice was steady, but his eyes held disappointment, a sadness deeper than anger. "I have no idea how you could do this to a man like Rick," he finally said. "A man who gave you everything, his love, his trust, his devotion, right up until the moment he gave his life for you." Cindy's chest tightened. Her fingers curled into fists on the table as a single, unbearable truth settled over her. Rick had never truly left, and whatever he had put into motion wasn't over yet. Brad placed a white envelope on the table, Cindy's name scrawled across it in familiar handwriting. His face was cold, his voice sharper than she had ever heard it. He made it clear this was the last time they would speak. He would remain in Michael and Sarah's lives, honoring his best friend's memory. But Cindy was nothing to him. If they crossed paths, he would be polite for the sake of Rick's children. But beyond that, she no longer existed in his world. As he turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear, "Selfish cheater." Cindy sat frozen, staring at the envelope as if it might burn her fingers. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Rick's. The weight of what lay inside crushed her, but after a few agonizing minutes, she forced herself to open it. "Cindy, 12 years have passed since the night everything changed. In my last note, I told you that one day you might hear from me again. That day has come. When I learned that Lori had tried to stop you from cheating with Bennett and that you ignored her, I reached out to her. She is the only person who knew what I intended. She begged me not to go through with it, even offered to take me and the kids in if I needed to escape. A woman of real integrity. I wish I had met her before you. When I refused her offer, she agreed to help carry out my final requests. My first request was for her to hold this letter until today, my 45th birthday. This morning, she delivered it to Brad along with another letter meant for him. If anything prevented her from doing so, I had a backup plan. But I hope Lori and Brad are both well enough to complete my unfinished business. This morning, both Michael and Sarah received letters from me detailing everything that happened 12 years ago. Every single truth. No more lies, no more deception. They are adults now, and they deserve to know what really happened. The statute of limitations for insurance fraud in California expired long ago, so their inheritance is untouchable. Whether they hate me for what I did or hate you for what you did is up to them. But I imagine they'll have plenty of questions. If my parents and yours are still alive, they will receive similar letters, as will my former business partners. As for Bennett, today's Santa Barbara News Press features a full-page article exposing his affair with you. It describes how the two of you built a thriving business together while sneaking around behind my back. It ends with a strong warning for couples to take their weddings elsewhere. I don't expect to destroy him completely, but I do hope it makes his life miserable. Maybe you two can comfort each other, assuming you haven't already. By the way, you're mentioned separately, so I'm sure some of your friends and colleagues will have questions. Cindy, nearly 13 years ago, I believed we had a perfect life. I trusted you. I loved you. But it was all a lie. Your lie. And now it's time to pay the full price for the life you so recklessly destroyed. Rick. Cindy barely had time to process the words before her phone exploded with calls and messages. 6 months later, Bennett's empire crumbled. All 3 of his properties were sold at massive losses. By the time he turned 53, Davis Bennett was financially ruined. Rick had been gone for over a decade, and yet he had never truly left.